All right, we are in our materials, real estate law for paralegals, in chapter 11, where we're going to talk about recording statutes and title examination. So this is part one where we're going to focus on the recording statutes. So of course the whole class we've been talking about property and real estate and owning real estate and the ownership rights we have in property and real estate. We learned about the deed, which is how we transfer ownership in real estate. And we also learned that title, when we say that word, is we're talking about ownership. And when we learned about the deeds, we talked about the requirements of a deed. And although acknowledgement isn't needed for a valid deed, it is needed for recording in the state of Texas. And we talked about what it means to record, which is filing the documents in the designated public registry, the system. In Texas, we use the county clerk. And so now we're going to talk about recording statutes. So when we talk about recording statutes, we are talking about state laws that determine the priority of rights in real estate when we have conflicting terms. So I'll say one thing, there are many statutes that deal with the process of recording, right? So procedural things, administrative things, what size your paper has to be, what types of documents you can take. But when we talk about these recording statutes, we're specifically going to focus on priority of rights when we have conflicting claims. So recording statutes serve several purposes. I think the overriding purpose is to encourage owners to record. I mean, it's to determine who owns property when we have people fighting over it, but it encourages owners to record, because if you record, you can help avoid certain problems. And then we want to protect innocent purchasers and creditors from bad things happening to them and fraud and things like that. So when we talk about innocent, right, the term innocent purchaser, we're talking about what they call a bona fide purchaser. And a bona fide purchaser just means somebody who acquires rights in real property for value without any notice of a pre-existing claim by somebody else, right? So they don't know about another claim, and they pay value for it, and so they are innocent. And we'll talk about them more as we go along. So how does a recording statute work? All right, so let's say we have Oscar. And Oscar owns Sesame Street. But Oscar wants to sell Sesame Street. And so one day he sells it to Abby. Says, Abby, I'm selling you Sesame Street. She gives him money. He gives her a deed. And he sells it to her. But then along comes Big Bird. And Oscar also sells Sesame Street to Big Bird. Big Bird gives him money. Oscar gives him a deed. He sold it to him. Now, I know it sounds confusing. How can you possibly sell the same property to two different people? Well, you can, because real estate doesn't move, right? So it's on the ground, right? It's there. You're not picking it up and moving it around. So it's not like a car or a computer or a TV where you hand somebody cash and then they hand you, the item that you just bought. Real estate doesn't move. So we transfer it with a deed. So it's just a piece of paper. You hand someone money, they hand you a piece of paper. That's all you have to show that you own property. So you can give two people the same type of paper and sell it to them both. It's called fraud, and it's not legal, but it can be done, right? It happens all the time. Sometimes it happens on purpose, which is fraud, and then sometimes it happens on accident, and then you have to try to work it out. But recording statutes, um, that's why we have them, is to determine who really owns Sesame Street, right? So we need something that determines who's going to be the owner. Recording statutes. So what are they? Well, there are three types of recording statutes. And really, I should say they're recording jurisdictions. So each state is its own jurisdiction, and each state has adopted one of these three methods of recording statute. So the first one is race. The next one is notice. And the third is the hybrid race notice. So pretty simple to remember, race notice and race notice. So how do they work? Well, with the race statute, it's pretty simple. Priority is given to the one who records first. So it is literally a race to the courthouse, right? If you're the first one to record, you win. It's a race. Simple. So here's Delaware is a race jurisdiction. Here's their statute. Deed concerning lands or tenements shall have priority from the time that it is recorded in the proper office without respect to the time that it was signed, sealed, and delivered. So here's the important part of that, right? A deed shall have priority from the time that it is recorded without respect to the time that it was signed, sealed, and delivered. So that's a race. Priority from the date of recording. So how does it work? Well, let's go back to our situation, right? So Oscar, he owns Sesame Street. He sells the property to Abby, and then he turns right around and sells the same exact property to Bird. So who owns Sesame Street? Bird thinks he owns it. Abby thinks she owns it. Who owns it? Well, we look to our recording statute for guidance. In this one, we're in a race jurisdiction. So we ask ourselves one simple question. Who was the first to record? Who won the race? So if it's Abby, she was the first to record, she owns the property. If Bird was the first to record, he won the race, he owns Sesame Street. So it's literally a race. Nothing else matters. It doesn't matter that it's fraud. It doesn't matter if Bird and Abby know about the sales to one another. Nothing else is relevant. The only thing that matters is who wins the race. So let's look at a question. So Homer is going to sell a parcel of land to Moe. Homer executes a valid deed and delivers to Moe, who does not record. The next day, Homer sells the same piece of land to Barney. Homer executes a valid deed and delivers to Barney, who records immediately. So who's going to own the land? Homer, Moe, or Barney? Well, we ask ourselves one question. Who was the first to record? Well, here it says Moe, when he got the property, did not record. And the very next day, he sold it to Barney. Barney recorded immediately. So who was the first to record? Barney. So Barney owns the property. How about this one? Same deal. Homer sells a parcel of land to Moe, executes a valid deed and delivers it to Moe. Moe does not record. Next day, Homer sells the same piece of land to Barney, executes a valid deed, but before he gives it to Barney, Homer says that he already sold the land to Moe the day before. Barney belches, takes the deed, and stumbles down the street to the courthouse to record. So who owns the land? Well, we ask ourselves one question. Who was the first to record? Here it says Moe did not record. The very next day, Barney belches, takes the deed, stumbles down to the courthouse to record. So it's going to be Barney. It doesn't matter that Homer told him, "Hey, Barney, I already sold this land to Moe, and I'm just taking your money and giving you a deed." It doesn't matter because Barney took the deed and went down and recorded. He was a responsible owner, right? And part of the purpose of recording statutes is to encourage owners to record. If Moe had gone down and to record, it wouldn't even be an issue. Barney would be out of luck, be crying in his beer. So by not recording, you're jeopardizing your ownership. So that's the point of the statute, is to get your butt down to the courthouse and file that deed if you want to protect your ownership. Be responsible. So in a race, doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is who won the race. Now you may be thinking, okay, so what happens to the loser, right? The one that doesn't own the property. Well, they're stuck with a claim to go after the seller for fraud. And maybe that person's already taken off to Mexico and never going to be found again. Who knows? But that's what they're stuck with. But we care about the winner. We want to know who wins the property, and loser, too bad. You should have done more homework. So the next type of statute is the notice statute. In this, we're talking about notice, right? So priority hinges on notice. And so there are three kinds of notice: constructive, actual, and inquiry. So we're talking about constructive or record notice. This means that the document has been filed in the public record for that particular jurisdiction. So in Texas, we use the county clerk. We're divided into counties. Um, so you file it with the county clerk, and everyone in the world is put on notice of a document the moment it is filed with the county clerk. All right, so this is notice that is legally presumed because of the document being filed in the public records. It's assumed that it's there. If you want to know about it, you can go down there and look and find out. Just because you don't doesn't mean you don't know about this document. It is now public record. It is there for everyone to see. If you don't go down and look, then shame on you. You're deemed to know about this document. So you, everyone out there, are legally aware of millions of documents that are down on file with the Harris County Clerk. Every single deed that's ever been filed in Harris County, Texas, you legally know about. Doesn't matter if you've never stepped foot into Harris County. Doesn't matter if you've ever looked up a record for Harris County. You legally know about it because it's a public record. If you want to know about it, you can come down here and find out about it. You can do it from your computer even. So that is record notice or constructive notice. You'll hear that term uh, most of the time, I think, constructive notice. That just means it's been filed in the public record. So the next type of notice is actual notice. And this one's simple. It just means notice that's directly given to the person about the property. This could be from the seller or someone closely related to the seller, or maybe even a third party, but there's something that gives you actual notice of a property. So for example, um, I go to buy a piece of real estate. I want to go check it out in person, and I'm walking around and checking it out, and the neighbor comes over and tells me, "Oh yeah, I know Bob. He just sold this property to a guy the other day." Well, now someone has told me about a conflicting interest. I have actual notice about it, or it may come from the seller directly or someone else, but you get some sort of actual notice of some adverse claim uh, to your interest. And the last one is called inquiry notice. And this means something that you see or hear, and it gives you a duty to investigate further. So let's say I'm buying this property. I want to go check it out. So I ask the seller. I say, "Hey, is that rental house that I want to buy? Does it have anybody in it? Is it occupied?" And the guy tells me, "No, it's been vacant for several months." So I say, "Okay, well, cool. I'm going to go by and drive by one night." And so that night I drive by, I see cars parked in the driveway, I see the lights on inside, I see movement. It looks like it's occupied. So now I have a duty to investigate and see if someone else has a claim adverse to the one I want to purchase. So that's inquiry notice. So that's what we're talking about is notice, right? Knowledge is notice. So Texas is a notice jurisdiction. So here's the meat of this one. A conveyance of real property is void as to a creditor or subsequent purchaser for valuable consideration without notice. So remember when we learned about the bona fide purchaser, it was a subsequent purchaser for value and without notice. So if you meet those requirements, then you're protected by the law. You're innocent. And so it's set out to protect you. So how does a notice jurisdiction or notice statute work? So we're back to our situation, right? Oscar has sold Sesame Street to Abby, then he has sold the same property to Big Bird. And we need to know who owns Sesame Street. Well, we look to our statute. This is a notice statute. We're looking for the bona fide purchaser. So here we ask ourselves a possibility of two questions. In a race jurisdiction, we only ask ourselves one question. But in a notice jurisdiction, we may ask two questions. The first question is going to be, did Abby record before the sale to Bird? If the answer to that question is yes, yes, Abby recorded before the sale to Bird, she is going to own Sesame Street. And we don't ask ourselves any more questions because Bird is going to have constructive or record notice. Doesn't matter if he actually knows, he has legal notice because Abby recorded before Big Bird bought that property. Big Bird county clerk and looked for deeds on that property to see who was the owner. If he did so, he would have saw that Abby owned it and not Oscar, and he could have saved himself some heartache and some money. But he did not go down to the county clerk. He handed over his money to trustworthy Oscar, who ran off to Mexico to drink his friend Slimy out of the bottom of a tequila bottle and lost his money because he had constructive notice because Abby recorded. But if the answer is no, Big Bird has hope. Hope is still alive. So we ask ourselves the second question. Did Bird have any other type of notice of the sale to Abby? So remember in question 1, we ask ourselves, is there constructive notice? Is there recorded notice? Question 2, we ask ourselves, is there any actual or inquiry notice that Big Bird had? So if the answer is yes, Big Bird did have some other type of notice. He had actual notice or he had inquiry notice of the sale to Abby, then Abby is going to win and she's going to own Sesame Street. But if the answer is no, Big Bird did not have actual notice. He did not have inquiry notice. He had no knowledge whatsoever, then he is going to own Sesame Street because he's going to be the bona fide purchaser. He's going to be poor, innocent Big Bird who had no knowledge of the sale to Abby. So we're going to protect him and he's going to get the property. Meanwhile, we're going to punish Abby, the irresponsible owner, or the irresponsible buyer, because she didn't go down and record. If she would have just went down and recorded, then when Bird went to buy the property, she would have been record owner and she would have won. But she didn't. So we reward Bird, or we protect Bird because he's innocent, and we sort of punish Abby for being irresponsible. But Abby is going to have a claim against Oscar because Oscar shouldn't be selling the property twice. So that's what she's going to be stuck with. Meanwhile, Bird gets to enjoy Sesame Street. All right, so let's look at it in real life, so to speak. Peter sells a parcel of land to Joe. Joe executes a valid deed and delivers to Joe, who immediately records. The next day, Peter sells the same piece of land to Cleveland. Peter executes a valid deed and delivers to Cleveland, who also records. Cleveland has no knowledge of the sale to Joe. Well, who owns the land? Well, we ask ourselves question 1. Did Joe record before the sale to Cleveland? It says here, Joe immediately recorded. So we stop there because there was constructive or record notice. Cleveland should have went down to the real property records and looked, and he would have saw Joe was the owner, not Peter. So we stop there. Joe owns the land. No need to go any further. Peter sells a parcel of land to Joe, executes a valid deed, and gives it to Joe, who does not record. The next day, Peter sells the same piece of land to Cleveland. Peter executes a valid deed and delivers it to Cleveland, who does not record either. Cleveland has no knowledge of the sale to Joe. So who owns the land? Well, we ask ourselves the first question. Did Joe record before the sale to Cleveland? No, Joe did not record. So we go to question 2. Did Cleveland have any other notice of the sale to Joe? No, Cleveland has no knowledge of the sale to Joe. So Cleveland is the winner. He's the bona fide purchaser. We protect him. How about here? Peter sells a parcel of land to Joe, executes a valid deed and delivers it to Joe, who does not record. The next day, Peter sells the same piece of land to Quagmire, has a valid deed, but before he delivers it to Quagmire, tells him that he sold the land to Joe the day before. Quagmire takes the deed and immediately records. So who's going to own the land? Well, we ask ourselves the first question. Did Joe record before the sale to Quagmire? No, Joe does not record. So go to question 2. Did Quagmire have any other notice of the sale to Joe? Well, Peter tells Quagmire that he sold the land to Joe the day before. He has actual notice from Peter that he sold the land. So that means Joe is going to own the land because Quagmire is not a bona fide purchaser. He had notice of the adverse claim, so we don't protect him. Doesn't matter that Joe doesn't record because we're not talking about recording here. We're talking about notice here. It's not a race jurisdiction. Recording isn't needed in a notice jurisdiction. It's highly recommended, and you jeopardize yourself if you don't, but it's not required. That's the trouble you get into when you don't record, and the reason we have the recording statutes is to determine, the different interest or who owns it when there's these conflicting claims. But it's not needed to record. The only thing that matters is notice. Quagmire had the notice, so Joe's going to own the land. All right, so this next one is the hybrid or combination, I should say, really, of race and notice. So uh, this is the priority is going to go to the one who takes without notice and wins the race. So Colorado is a race notice jurisdiction. And so the meat of this one says, no unrecorded instrument shall be valid against any person who first records except against those having notice. And then they explicitly tell you, in case you can't read all that legal jargon, this is a race notice recording statute. They specifically tell you that's in there. That's not me just putting it there and highlighting it. That's actually in their statute. So how does the race notice work? Well, we got to go back to our situation. Oscar owns Sesame Street. He has sold it to Abby, and then he has sold the same property to Big Bird. And we're trying to determine who owns it. So here we ask ourselves a possibility of 3 questions. Thankfully, the first 2 are the same questions we asked ourselves in the notice jurisdiction. So there's not a whole lot of new stuff here. So you ask yourself, did Abby record before the sale to Bird? And the same thing happens. If yes, she did record, then right, we have our old trusty friend constructive notice, and Abby wins and Bird's out of luck, and we stop there. But if the answer is no, just like before, we go on to question 2. Did Bird have any other type of notice of the sale to Abby? This is our friend's actual and inquiry notice. So if the answer is yes, Bird did have actual notice, or yes, Bird did have inquiry notice, then Abby is going to be the owner of Sesame Street because Bird had notice, just like before. But if the answer is no, Bird did not have actual notice, Bird did not have inquiry notice, and the answer was no in question 1, Bird did not have constructive notice, he has no notice at all, then we go to question 3. And that is, who was the first to record after the sale to Bird, right? So it's our question from the race jurisdiction, who was the first to record? If Abby is the first to record after the sale to Bird, then she is the owner. But if Bird is the first to record after he acquires a property, then he's going to own the property. So he has to take without notice and be the first to record if he wants to be the bona fide purchaser. So how does this work? So Stan sells a parcel of land to Cartman. Stan executes a valid deed and delivers to Cartman, who immediately records. The next day, Stan sells the same piece of land to Kyle. Stan executes a valid deed and delivers to Kyle, who has no knowledge of the sale to Cartman. Kyle immediately records. Who owns the land? Well, we ask ourselves the first question. Did Cartman record before the sale to Kyle? Yes, Cartman immediately recorded. So we stop there. Cartman recorded. There's constructive notice before the sale to Kyle. Cartman wins. We stop. But here, let's say we have Stan sells a parcel of land to Cartman, executes a valid deed and delivers to Cartman, who does not record. The next day, Stan sells the same piece of land to Kyle. Stan executes a valid deed, but before delivering to Kyle, tells him of the sale to Cartman. Kyle takes the deed and immediately records. Who owns the land? Well, we ask ourselves the first question. Did Cartman record before the sale to Kyle? No, Cartman does not record. So we go to question 2. Did Kyle have any other notice of the sale to Cartman? Yes, Stan told Kyle of the sale to Cartman, so he had actual notice. So once again, Cartman is the winner. He owns the land, and we stop there. How about here? Stan sells a parcel of land to Cartman, executes a valid deed, and delivers it to Cartman. Cartman does not record. Next day, Stan sells the same piece of land to Kyle, executes a valid deed, and delivers to Kyle, who has no knowledge of the sale to Cartman. Kyle does not record. The next day, Cartman records. We ask ourselves, who owns the land? Question 1. Did Cartman record before the sale to Kyle? No, Cartman, who does not record. We go to question 2. Did Kyle have any other notice of the sale to Cartman? No, Kyle has no knowledge of the sale of Cartman. So now we make it to question 3. Who recorded first after the sale to Kyle? Well, it says here Kyle does not record, but then the next day Cartman does. So once again, Cartman is the winner. He owns the property. How about this one? Stan sells a piece of land to Cartman, executes a valid deed and delivers to Cartman, who does not record. Next day, Stan sells the same piece of land to Kyle, executes a valid deed and delivers to Kyle, who has no knowledge of the sale to Cartman. Kyle immediately records. The next day, Cartman records. Who owns the land? Well, question 1, did Cartman record before the sale to Kyle? No, Cartman does not record. We go to question 2. Did Kyle have any other notice of the sale to Cartman? No, Kyle has no knowledge of the sale to Cartman. Question 3. Who recorded first after the sale to Kyle? Kyle recorded immediately. Then the next day, Cartman did. So Kyle finally is the winner. He owns the property. So that's the race notice. All right, so what you should take away is you have to know the 3 types of jurisdictions, right? Race notice, race notice, and you need to know the 3 types of notice, record, actual, or inquiry, and know what a bona fide purchaser is. Stay tuned for more, Chapter 11.